Let's look at the Spear of Destiny and real magical weapons from the medieval period. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So obviously this isn't the Spear of Destiny, this isn't the Holy Lance, this is a winged spear. For a very good reason I'm using this, and we'll look at that later in the video. But what we're looking at in this video are magical, or should we say religious weapons from the medieval period. And people are very used to thinking of medieval history and historical factual weapons in one hand, and then they're used to thinking in a completely separate category of fantasy magical weapons. But the fact is that in the medieval period there were holy relic weapons and mythological weapons like famous Excalibur, of course, that to the people at the time, or at least to some people at the time, were real objects that had real magical, or should we say godly or spiritual powers. Okay, and they very much, some of those people very much believed in those things. So to them, magical weapons were real. So in this video we're going to consider that fact, but we're also going to look at a specific example which is known as the Spear of Destiny, or the Holy Lance, or the Lance of Longinus. In other words, the spear that was used to stab Jesus in the side on the cross to find out whether he was alive or not. There are actually four claimants to be the Spear of Destiny, or the Lance of Longinus, that have come down after the time of Jesus. We'll look a little bit at those, but we'll look specifically at one example which still survives in Vienna. But before I go on, I want to talk very briefly about our sponsors for this video, who are Raid Shadow Legends. Now, you all know Raid is a massively popular game that you can play on your mobile phone or your PC, and it features lots of magical weapons just like the Spear of Destiny. Raid Shadow Legends has taken over and gaming will never be the same again. Raid's the first game to bring true console level gameplay to your phone, and there's no going back now. Explore millions of characters and countless gaming options as you battle with numerous different bosses. You can fight in the dungeons, do campaigns, and do person versus person battles against other players. With hundreds of different artifacts and 500 characters to use, you can build your team your way and play the game exactly how you want to. You can use my link below right now to download for free the game to your phone or your PC. So you guys know I've been playing Raid for quite a while now, and here are some of my favourite champions. I'm a big fan of Battle Sage, and who wouldn't be? Battle Sage is an epic high elf, and if you want to get through Faction Wars, Doom Tower, Dragon's Lair and Spider's Den, then Battle Sage is always a great option. She increases attack buff on all allies and can't be removed, and removes all debuffs on all allies. And that's perfect against all the spiderlings in the Spider's Den. I also love Astrolon from the Sacred Order. I mean, for a start, he looks totally badass. His default skill is to attack one enemy 2 times, and if Countess Lix is also on the team, she joins him, resulting in a 3-hit combo from legendary champions. What's more, his secondary skill is to attack one enemy and ignores the enemy's protection debuffs. Even his passive skill is really useful. It allows Astrolon to fill his turn meter by 3% each time an ally is hit, and decrease the incoming damage. What I personally love the most is going into the arena and fighting other people. Let's destroy this person. Boom! I also really enjoy going into the dungeons and trying to get better times. So just this month, Raid released an insane amount of new content. They've just released 11 new champions and almost 200 new missions to complete, with an exclusive legendary champion to get if you complete them all. And if that wasn't enough, they've added 5 tough new levels to almost every dungeon in the game. That's a crazy amount of updates for 1 month. As always, Raid continues to get bigger and better every month, and there's never been a better time to start. So what are you waiting for? Go and check out the link below, underneath in the description box, and you can support the channel and also have a go at this game on your mobile or PC for free now. Once you're into the game, you can find me there as Captain Context, and if you're quick enough, you can join my clan. And it's that easy, and it's free. Go and check out that description now, and I will see you in game. So thanks for sticking with us. Now let's get back to magical weapons, or should we say godly, spiritual, religious weapons, and mythical weapons in the Middle Ages. So the first thing I want to say and kind of sort of wrap up relatively quickly is the fact that you have to accept that in the Middle Ages, religious artifacts associated with saints, or in this case Jesus, and in some cases also sort of characters from great kings and great rulers and stuff like this, like swords that belonged to Charlemagne or Genghis Khan or whatever else, they did have enormous economic and political clout. Okay, they were very, very important artifacts in medieval politics. Who owned that thing? If you owned the thing of the famous person, then it conferred a certain amount of power to you. If it was religious, it meant you got pilgrims. Pilgrims were incredibly important financially, because if you have a church which has a lot of pilgrims to it, the pilgrims give money, because in their eyes at that time, that's giving money essentially to God. It's to show their piety and show how serious they are about their beliefs. And you collect that money up and you become really rich. So clearly, and in terms of political as well, if we look at swords, for example, during Richard III's time, a sword was supposedly excavated, which was claimed to be dug up from a grave, I think in Glastonbury, which was claimed to be King Arthur's sword, possibly Excalibur. And this was given as a diplomatic gift. So in diplomacy, in politics, in economics, in just general kind of, power building, whether it's religious power building or kind of kingly power building, remembering the three estates of the medieval world, the people, the church and the king, it was an incredibly important thing to have control of these objects. Okay, so putting that aside, and then also we have to accept that they did believe in, most people were very religious, but equally they had a belief in a certain degree of mythology as well. So most people didn't even question whether Arthur had existed, King Arthur. King Arthur was a real person. He had a sword called Excalibur that did magical things. In addition to that, people fully accepted what was written in whichever version of the Bible was told to them, because bear in mind that for most of the Middle Ages, people didn't read the Bible themselves. It was written in Latin and they were told about it by their church priest. And this was one of the big changes that came about with the printing press and the spread of Protestantism, where people actually started reading versions of these books themselves in their own language. But prior to that, for most of the medieval period, people just believed whatever their priest told them. So all of these stories from the Bible were just taken completely at face value. A lot of the objects, whether it's the finger bone of Thomas à Becket or whether it's the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Lance, people just took it for granted that that was the real thing. And even very educated people, very well-travelled people, and we'll look at that in a bit, some sources actually talk about the Holy Lance, the Spear of Destiny, and having seeing one in Paris and one in Rome, or one in Constantinople. So sometimes people saw an object that claimed to be a thing. Oh, that's the spear that stabbed Jesus, but that place over there, the Byzantines, they claim to have one of those as well. There can't be two of them. Which one's real? So there must have been an awareness amongst some people that a lot of these artifacts were fake and were fabricated in the time. But nevertheless, when you read the primary sources, they're reluctant to suggest that because of their piety, because they could be held up as heretics. You didn't want to possibly question the church when those very powerful people over there say they've got the Holy Lance, and those powerful people over there say they've got the Holy Lance. Oh, well, maybe they're both the Holy Lance and it was broken and made into two, and you think of other explanations. So the fact is, people at this time, whether it's common people, farmers going to the local church once a week, or whether it's very educated people who are actually travelling around the world to these different places and seeing these artifacts, they did have a very deeply grained belief, or whether it's a genuine belief or whether it's a kind of being forced to believe, that these objects had a basically magical significance. Okay, some of these things had healing powers, supposedly. Some of these things could make people tell the truth and have all of these other sorts of what we would now call magical effects. So now let's go back to my study and let's consider the history of the Holy Lance, or the Lance of Longinus, otherwise known as the Spear of Destiny. What is this exactly? Is it one object? Well, it's actually multiple objects. And also let's have a little look at the surviving example in Vienna, because it's a very interesting artifact. So the story goes that the Holy Lance is a artifact from the time of the crucifixion that was used by a Roman soldier, an unnamed Roman soldier who later became known as a centurion by the name of Longinus. And the spear or lance was used to pierce Jesus' side after he died on the cross to check that he was dead. Now, it should be mentioned that this is from St. John's Gospel. It's not in the other main Gospels. And just to reiterate, the Longinus connection, the name of the Roman soldier, potentially a centurion, that was stuff that comes in later as well. Okay, so that's not in the original in John's Gospel. That is purely as an unnamed Roman soldier in that gospel. Now, when Jesus' body was stabbed with this spear, out of it flowed blood and water, and obviously this was very symbolic and very important to later doctrine within the church, and taken to mean different things by different groups of people. But nevertheless, because this spear is mentioned in John's gospel and it was part of this very symbolic act and the blood and the water thing, should this spear survive, it would obviously be an incredibly powerful artifact for the church to own and have control of, or for any monarch to own and have control of. And so for that reason, there was very much a vested interest in finding this spear of this Roman soldier. Now, just to go on a tangent for a second and talk about what would this spear have been like, well, we don't actually know, because we don't know very much about the role of the Roman soldier. Some people have described it as a pilum, and indeed it could have been a pilum, but it equally could have been a normal triarii type spear, so a leaf-shaped spearhead on a shaft. It doesn't need to have been a specialised pilum. And in fact, I would say in the role that that Roman soldier would have been there at the crucifixion, I think a pilum actually would be quite unlikely. So if you read people describing the Holy Lance as a pilum, first of all, none of the surviving ones are, and we'll talk about the surviving ones in a second. But equally, I don't think it likely that that sort of soldier in that sort of role, in that part of the world at that time, would have been carrying a pilum around, because I don't think it would be a very useful sort of weapon for crowd control. I think it would have been more likely that he would have been carrying a more of a normal conventional spear. So whether the actual original spear survived or not, obviously highly unlikely, but nevertheless possible. That's a question that we don't know the answer to, but there are 4 candidates, shall we say. There are 4 objects from history which claimed to be that spear, which claimed to be the holy spear, otherwise known as the Lance of Longinus or the Spear of Destiny, various names it goes by. We'll call it the Holy Lance, I think, because that's the most commonly used name for it. But there are 4 clearly notable historical examples of objects which claimed or still claim to be the Holy Lance. So throughout history, there have been various claims as to this Holy Lance, this surviving lance that pierced Jesus' side. And it comes up in various historical documents, first in the 6th century. In AD 570, Antoninus of Piacenza says that he saw this lance in Jerusalem, or one of perhaps many lances. We don't know if this lance relates to any of the later lances that are mentioned or survived, or indeed if this was an artifact that became lost. The next step in the story is that in the year 615, Persian forces overran Jerusalem, and the various things were taken out of Jerusalem, and the point of a lance, which may or may not be the same one that Antoninus had mentioned, was actually taken to Constantinople. This spear point or spearhead from Constantinople found its way to France, to Louis IX of France, and so was in Paris, but it disappeared. So we don't necessarily know what it was or what it looked like, we don't really know either if this is the same object which goes all the way back to Jerusalem. Now, Sir John Mandeville, whose travels and diaries many of you might be familiar with in the middle of the 14th century, actually talks about the Holy Lance as well, and he says that he saw it in both Paris and Constantinople. How is this possible? Were there two spears? Were they different parts of a broken artifact? We don't really know. And to add confusion to the matter, Sir John Mandeville writes a whole load of nonsense in his books, so we don't know if any of it was true and if he actually saw anything at all. Now things get even more complicated because, of course, Constantinople fell to the Turks in 1453, and the Ottomans actually gave a lance, the point of a lance, to the Pope in Rome as a diplomatic, or shall we say bribery, as a gift. But nevertheless, it was given to the Pope, given to the papacy, and we now have a situation whereby there is a lance head in Paris and there's a lance head in Rome, and in fact others, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Now the Pope at that point asked for drawings of the lance head to be sent from Paris, and he concluded that they were two parts of the same lance head, and that what was in Paris was the tip of the spear and that he had the rest of it. So that's one conclusion, and you know, it's not impossible that they are two parts of the same artifact, but that remains to be investigated. Now, so we've got the point in Paris, we've got which has gone missing, incidentally, thanks to the French Revolution. We've got the rest of the head in the Basilica in Rome. So we've also got in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Now we've also got two other rivals to be the Holy Lance or Spear of Destiny. And I'll dispense with one of those quite quickly. So one of those is in Armenia. Now that did exist as a rival item of pilgrimage, the Holy Lance in Armenia. And pictures of it are freely available, and I think we can quite quickly conclude that this is definitely not a spearhead in a conventional sense of the word, and it's almost certainly not from the time of Christ. This appears to me to be some sort of top to a staff or a banner, an emblem, something like this. So it's not impossible that this could be a very old object with some true historical meaning behind it. But I don't think at all that this can be a spearhead that was used to pierce Jesus's side on the cross. I don't think it's old enough for that, and I don't think it's even a spearhead, frankly. So let's dispense with the Armenian example straight away and move on to what's actually the most interesting object, I think, anyway, in this whole matter, and that is the famous Vienna Holy Lance. Now, the Vienna Holy Lance has actually been in possession of the Holy Roman Emperors since the 10th century, okay, continuously, so until the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved. But basically, it's been in that collection, in that association since the 10th century, so for 1,000 years, which is pretty incredible. So just as a historical object, taking aside all of the religious and Christian related mythology, I think we can say actually at this point, as we'll find out in a minute, it is a very interesting historical artifact. This also hasn't always been known as the Holy Lance or the Lance of Longinus. It has also been known at various points as the Spear of St. Maurice and also the Spear of Constantine the Great. Now, to anyone who knows about the history of weapons, looking at this, it's very obvious when you first look at it that it is not a simple spearhead. It's an assemblage of different parts that have been put together, as it turns out, at different times, from different objects. Now, part of this is a genuine historical spear, okay? And that, probably for most viewers of this channel, is the most interesting part of the whole assemblage. And it is genuinely a Carolingian era, probably 9th century, winged spear. Now, winged spears like the example I own were very popular in this period. They seem to have been used both one-handed with a shield and two-handed by themselves as well. The wings themselves have numerous uses, one for diverting, deflecting and parrying an opponent's spear shaft, probably for manipulating opponents' shields, possibly at a push to prevent over penetration as well through a man or a horse. Or indeed, you'll notice the similarity with boar spears, which is the same kind of purpose. The bars are there to prevent over penetration through the boar, or more importantly, to prevent the boar from running up the shaft and getting to you. So I think it has all of these purposes. I think the over penetration point is perhaps something that's maybe overemphasized because of its superficial similarity to boar spears, but I don't think that was the primary purpose of these lugs on the winged spear. The primary purpose, I think, was for using it as a fighting weapon to push aside other opposing spears and to hook shields and this kind of stuff. Now, as you can see, this isn't a simple winged spear. What appears to have been done to it is that it appears to have had the main part of the blade of the original winged spear taken off. It then seems to have had sort of fake blades, as it were, much bigger blades, superimposed around it and then bound on, sort of wired on. It has a silver and later gold-plated plate put around the middle, presumably to make it seem more illustrious. And it also had a nail included in its assemblage or construction. And the nail, for a long time, was thought to have been one of the nails from the cross. More recent analysis of the metallurgy, actually, of the spearhead and of the nail suggests that, in fact, they are both medieval. The spearhead's probably 8th, 9th, 10th century, definitely, probably 9th century. And the nail is probably of the same period. But it was probably all put together with this idea that what they could do is make a spear that looked fantasy, that looked like a relic, that had a nail included in it. So it seems to have been invented, created and constructed very much as a holy relic. Now, just to diverge for a second, this was actually quite common in period. The manufacture of holy relics was a very lucrative business. And you think who your customers are. Your customers are potentially popes, cardinals, all of the high members of the church, monarchs, dukes, lords with deep pockets. So lots of people, it was within their interest, both in the church and in the monarchy and the nobility, to have your hands on these holy relics, because these holy relics could buy alliances, they could buy lucrative marriage treaties and marriages, these sorts of alliances and diplomatic gifts. They held a certain amount, not just of sort of political and economic power, but of magical power as well. And you know, if you wanted to inspire your army, if it's a crusading army or an invading army in Europe, if you carry on the top of your banner the Holy Lance head, then that has a lot of kudos to it. William the Conqueror, when he invaded England in 1066, had papal backing. This was a very potent thing. And these holy artifacts, or whether they were fabricated or real, but these holy artifacts they slotted into that overall context of power. So obviously this has only been a cursive summary view of the Holy Lance. It's actually the histories of each of the individual surviving or surviving up to a certain point in the past. In the case of the Paris example, Holy Lances are all individually very, very interesting. And I recommend, it's one of those rare examples where I'm actually going to recommend a Wikipedia page. So I'm going to put the link below to the Wikipedia page where you can actually read more about the Holy Lance, which goes into far more detail than I could have done in this video. But I suspect that some of the people watching this video won't ever have even heard of the Holy Lance, or the Spear of Destiny, or the Lance of Longinus. So go and have a look at that, read through it if you're interested in learning more about this. It's a really, really interesting thing. But really, just to conclude, I want you to go away from this video realizing that magical weapons were a real thing to medieval people. Obviously, they didn't have real magical properties. Maybe some people watching this video believe that they did in the case of some religious artifacts, and that's fine. Everyone's beliefs are their own. But from my perspective, the true magic of these magical weapons was the belief that people at that time actually had in them. They believed they were real, and that gave them actually real physical power. Because if you believed that that lance at the head of your army was the actual lance that pierced Jesus's side, you would fight and die for that, because you believed in eternal life. You believed that that was a truly sacred object, and you would follow, you wouldn't flee from battle, you would follow that symbol, you would believe in the righteousness of your leader. So the magic of these artifacts were real in their time because of the effects that they could have over the people that fought and died and over these things and protected them. You only have to look at the Crusades to see what people fought and died over. In some cases, it was one artifact, the control of one building or one artifact, one place. So very, very powerful stuff. I hope this has been thought-provoking and interesting, and check out that link, and by all means go and read more. I'm sure there's some more academic works out there on the Spear of Destiny as well, but it's a very, very interesting sort of snapshot of the view into the mind and the politics of the medieval period. Thanks for watching. I'm Matt Easton, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.